Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Diana Conway. I'm president of the Montgomery County Women's Democratic Club. Welcome to this fall's first panel, presented by Women's Democratic Club in tandem with our colleagues at the Latino Democratic Club and in honor of historic Hispanic Heritage Month. I want to thank the brand new chair of our Community Education Committee, Gloria Aparicio, for assembling this panel of experts within weeks of becoming our newest board member. So thank you, Gloria. And I'm excited to say we have a bit of a surprise guest this evening who will join us in just a few minutes. A woman, an immigrant, an accomplished engineer, and an elected official and mother, our next Lieutenant Governor, Aruna Miller. She will address us in just a few minutes, followed by the Latino Democratic Club President and Luisa Arevalo and also Gabriela Aparicio, who will take over. Before I hand it over to Aruna, I just wanted to run through a quick couple of slides here, Scott. This is the Women's Democratic Club. This was our fall kickoff in September, and we'd love to have folks join us. This is the only event we host that is members only, but it's $35 a year, so we welcome everyone. Has not gone up in many years, and we also have student rates available. Next slide. And we urge you to join WDC. We have speaker series, and we have community education panels like tonight. We host candidate forums. We engage in state and county advocacy on key issues that affect women and their families, which is everything. We help with Get Out the Vote, and we have what we call now happy hours with a purpose. So we urge you to get busy with one of our committees, which are, we have a bunch of committees that cover any kind of interest or skill that you can bring to us, and a tight community of board members who work hard to bring these programs together. These are some of the recent events that we've hosted. You can see there's a variety of political speakers, policy speakers, and a lot of crossover between the two. And we are planning to host soon Chuck Rosenberg, who you may remember from the Mueller report and is on MSNBC all the time. Dr. Fred Yang is a national pollster. He will be joining us November 29th. We just settled the date and to unpack the election, of course. And we'll be inviting Dr. Fiona Hill back on her new book and members of our federal delegation as always. Scott? Thank you. And we really look forward to your questions. And in order to submit them, you're welcome to put anything you'd like in the chat, but to get your questions to the moderator, if you go down to the chat box and choose Q&A as the person you want to send a private message to, type anything you'd like in there, and our crack team, which is Mary Lou Fox, our treasurer, will get those questions to Gloria and to Luisa for us. So I'd like to now invite Aruna Miller, our next Lieutenant Governor, to join us and say a few words.
Thank you so much, Diana. Buenas noches, Montgomery County and Latinx Democrats. Me llamo Aruna Miller, and I am so honored to be your Democratic nominee for Lieutenant Governor. I want to thank the WDC and the Latino Democratic Club as well for hosting today's event. And thank you for inviting me to join you today for this important discussion. Look, as we continue celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, it's always important to step back and reflect on our accomplishments in building pathways to leadership in the Latinx community. But also we chart the path forward to encourage growth in representation that matches the growth in our communities. We are so lucky to be living in the most diverse state on the East Coast. Look, across the nation, there's only 6 states that are majority minority. Most of them are on the West Coast, but here on the East Coast, Maryland is #1 in our diversity. It's the immigrants, it's our diverse voices, it's our diverse communities that make Maryland one of the greatest states to live. And it's because of the Latinx community and all immigrants and all the individuals that add to our great state. But that's not enough. We need to make sure that we have representation available. And this is personal. This is personal to me as a woman, as an immigrant, and as a person of color. Look, I came to this country as an immigrant when I was 7 years old in 1972. And I'm grateful for the tremendous opportunities that so many people before us have fought. So immigrants from all over the world can come to America and call themselves American. That is a great privilege and honor to be an American. But part of that privilege comes with making sure our representation is there as we run for public office, as we seek for greater representation in our corporations and higher leadership, as you know, as we are as civically engaged citizens in our community. These are all elements that are very important, and it's going to happen. It's not going to happen unless we have panel discussions like we're going to have today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from these great esteemed panelists to hear their stories and what they have to say. But moving forward, I want to remember, to remind every one of you that we have an election coming ahead, right? We all know that we are 27 days now away from Election Day. And let me tell you, there is a lot at stake on the ballot. Women's right to choose is on the ballot. Equity is on the ballot, whether it's in education, in providing economic opportunities, or solutions to climate change. Westmore and I are running on a mission to leave no one behind. Our Republican opponent, he rejects the women's right to choose. He is an election denier and fought to have the 2020 election overturned, and he voted with just 2 other Annapolis lawmakers to keep spousal rape legal. Did you hear that? He wanted to keep spousal rape legal. So the stakes couldn't be higher, folks. And we all need to make sure our communities get out and vote. Because if we don't vote, we're going to end up in a situation with our opponents being the next governor and lieutenant governor. We don't want that. So let's band together as we always do. Let's band with our brothers and sisters of all ethnicities, of all racial backgrounds, of all religious minorities. Let's come together and make sure that our voice is heard on Election Day. And I thank you again for being here. And thank you to all the Latina leaders that are here. I'm grateful for the way our state is right now, how diverse it is. I'm grateful for your leadership and your voice in how we create policy. I'm grateful for CASA, who plays such a tremendous role in making sure the issues that are important to immigrants are always front and center. And we look forward to working together with every one of you. So thank you for having me here. And it's been wonderful celebrating the Hispanic Heritage Month. I think it should be every month, right? Let's make sure that, Hispanics are celebrated every single day, because they've added so much to our great nation, and they're going to continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Aruna, and thank you so much for joining us. We know you have kind of a busy schedule these days. And I just want to remind everyone that tomorrow is the only gubernatorial debate at 7 o'clock at the Civic Center, I believe. Is that right?
I think it was actually today, Diana, and it's going to be aired on MPT tonight.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Well, on that note, let me hand it over to Gloria and to Gabriela to take it from here.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. And I'm Gloria Paricio, and I'm excited to be a new member of the board of the Women's Democratic Club. It's an amazing group. I just wanted to invite Luisa Arevalo to give us some few words about from the Latino Democratic Club, which is an amazing partnership that we have here. And I'm excited to know that they are working so hard to get our votes out. Luisa?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Luisa Arevalo, and I'm the president of the Latino Democratic Club. I want to thank you for joining us for these Heritage Month celebration. Like Aruna said, I think we should be celebrated every month. Our contributions are everywhere, and you can see them everywhere, from everyday life to now representation. Although we need a lot more, we have, it has gotten better, but we still need true representation at all levels. So I'm really excited to see to have the panelists that we have tonight. These amazing women are example of the contributions the Latino community has made to this country. And they're not just great on their respective fields, they're actually community leaders as well. So I'm really excited to have them here tonight. And I wanna thank them for taking the time and accepting our invitation to be here. I also wanna thank the Women's Democratic Club for helping us put this together. Especially I wanna thank Gloria for calling, texting, and having this great idea of putting this panel of great Latinas together tonight. So I'm really excited to see you. I want to remind everyone that we need to come out to vote. It's really important, not just for the Latino community, but in general, like Aruna said, there's a lot of things in stake. So please, please, please go out to vote. Bring your family, bring your friends. The Latino community goes where our family tells us to go, where our friends tell us to go. So please just bring everybody, go out to vote. I'm really excited for this tonight. So let's get started.
Thank you so much, Luisa. And right now, I know that people are waiting to hear from the panel. And I want to say again, thank you, Aruna, for being here. We appreciate it. That means that we are in your list and you are in your priority. Remember, we all vote and we're all not all Democrats. So we have to get those other ones that are not. So with that, I'm going to introduce my wonderful friend, Dr. Gabriela Lemus. Dr. Gabriela Lemus is an executive director of the Maryland Latinos Unidos. She's a passionate advocate for the Latinx community at the intersection of social justice and economic growth. Her career spans more than 20 years in senior strategic leadership roles in the congressional and government affairs, nonprofit management, policy advocacy, community and civic participation. She joined Maryland Latinos Unidos as the founding executive director in 2020 after launching Revolution Strategy US, a management and communication strategy consultancy where she advised clients best practices for building multiracial coalitions and advocacy campaigns, advancing public policy and civic engagement. In her first year as executive director of MLU, she co-founded and administers the Mid-Atlantic Latinx Vaccine Equity Coalition, which has evolved into the Latino Health Equity Alliance. Gabriela has a PhD from the University of Miami, where she studied international policy, economy, and political theory, and wrote her dissertation on the drug war and the US-Mexico border, implication for bilateral relations. She serves as a trustee of the University of the District of Columbia and HBCU from 2012 to 2018. And she serves in numerous boards. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Gabriela Lemus. You have done so many things, my friend. Take it away.
Thank you, Gloria. It's a variety show in if you look at my CV. Thank you so much, and thank you to the Women's Democratic Club and the Latino Democratic Club for hosting this event. Hispanic Heritage Month is near and dear to my heart, but by the end of it, I sometimes make a poor joke that maybe I should pretend I'm not Latina for a while, because it is exhausting. Everybody wants to learn about our community, and I am happy to be an advocate for all of us, because it is a large community, but it's also very varied. I'm going to do two things right now. I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists, and I am going to give you a very short PowerPoint slide show to talk a little bit about where Latinos' heads are at right now. So without further ado, Dr. Perla Guerrero is our first speaker. She will be our first speaker, and she is an associate professor of American Studies and U.S. Latino Studies at the University of Maryland, College Park. Her research and teaching interests include relational race and ethnicity with a focus on Latinx and Asian Americans, space and place, immigration and legality, labor, U.S. and Mexican history. She has received multiple awards, including a Ford Foundation postdoctoral fellowship and 2 from the Smithsonian Institution to be a postdoc fellow at the National Museum of American History. Her first book, Nuevo South, Latina, Latinos, Asians, and the Remaking of Place, examines how racial cleansing in sundown towns made Northwest Arkansas into a particular kind of place, and analyzes the political and economic factors that are shifting social conditions and racial mores. She's currently working on her second book, Deportations, Aftermath, Displacement, and Making a Life in Exile, which she seeks to understand what happens to different kinds of people after deportation and coerced return. Mariana Cordier will be our second speaker, and she is the founding partner of a firm that represents individuals and families from all walks of life throughout the state of Maryland. Her primary experience and practice is in litigation of criminal, family, and civil matters. Her criminal experience has ranged from newsworthy felony cases to simple misdemeanor offenses. She often represents individuals who find themselves confronted with family law disputes and issues, as well as other civil matters, including contracts, etc., landlord-tenant issues. And in her spare time, she frequently serves as a legal commentator on news, radio, and print publications to discuss what's going on today. What are the current trends and issues facing the community, including criminal law? She is the past president of the Maryland Hispanic Bar Association, fellow of the Maryland Bar Foundation, and the Montgomery County Bar Foundation, as well as the past secretary general of the Inter-American, Bar Association, and past president of the IABA's Women's Right Committee. She's a member of the Montgomery County Bar Association and the State Bar Association, and has served on several committees. Lastly, but not least, Teresa Werman, well, Saavedra Woorman, let me correct myself. She is currently the Montgomery County Democratic Central. She's representing District 16 on the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, and she is the vice president of the Montgomery County Young Democrats. Professionally, she is currently the campaign manager for County Executive Mark Elrich, his reelection campaign, and she has worked on campaigns at the state, local, and federal levels in Anne Arundel, Prince George's, and Montgomery County. She has served as chief of staff and legislative aide to various elected officials in the Maryland House of Delegates and the Senate. And while Teresa has helped a few elected officials get and stay in office, she just ran her first election in July and won. Teresa was born in Puebla, Mexico, and currently lives in Bethesda. I will now, I'm going to share briefly my screen and show you like I said, a brief PowerPoint on sort of where Latinos are at the moment. We're building Latino power. So my first slide. Is not changing. Come on. There we go. Trends in the Latino vote in 2022. And I think this is really important, just these 3 points to bear in mind. The first is that if you compare the midterms in 2018, it was a very low turnout. Only about 2/3 of, and today's vote comparison, only about 2/3 of Latino voters are actually saying they've given some thought to the midterm elections. One of the things you don't hear them saying about, talking about much though, is governor's elections, which I found rather interesting. A second point to bear in mind is that a lot of Latinos, about 60%, think that the country is on the wrong track. Yet, only 59% are saying that they are really serious about turning out to vote. These are registered voters or eligible to vote, eligible voters. And that means there's 41% of the eligible voters in the Latino community that may or may not turn out. And then lastly, my third big point that I wanted to share with all of you was that when you look at Republicans and Democrats, Republicans tend to lean about 90% into the state of the economy right now. But I think it's important to bear in mind that 75% of Democrats are saying the same thing. It's about the economy right now. So what can we expect from Latino voters? A lot of the media is saying that Latino voters are in limbo. So the first is that Latinos are now a swing vote. They had became a swing vote a little bit back, but really what we're seeing is that many Democratic voters, because of their concerns about the economy, are persuadable. And that does not mean that Republicans have won them over. It just means they are on the fence. The other thing to think about is the Latino vote is kind of stuck in the same place it was in 2016 and 2020. But also, there was an 8-point swing in 2016 and 2020 towards the Republicans. However, that's it. It hasn't moved from there. Republicans have not convinced them to vote for them. They're just choosing not to vote. And then to that same point, Latino voters need persuasion. And like I said, a number of them remain on the fence and are still choosing sides. And we don't know what late breakers are going to do. So it's important to continue to reach out to the community and hear what they have to say, because they could turn out to vote that 41% I mentioned, or they could just stay home and sit on the couch. But which is better? So I also wanted to raise the issues that are really salient to the Latino community right now, because if you look at surveys from, and I don't say polls on purpose because polls are really one moment in time. This is more trends. If you look at surveys from earlier in the year, from spring, April, May, really the emphasis was on healthcare. That continues to be very critical, but a number of things have happened. One, inflation. And really what Latino voters are seeing is they want investment in their communities. They want investment in working families. That means rental assistance. That means healthcare assistance for insurance. I don't know if you're aware of this insurance, uninsured Latinos the number has gone up, I believe, to a higher number than it was in 2016 when Obamacare went into play. This is really challenging for our community. And the other thing is education. It's really critical that Latinos start to see investments in education. They're very worried about their kids. A lot of children, because of the online trends in having to educate during the COVID pandemic, are now having to catch up, and they'd like to see more attention paid to that. The second is immigration reform. Immigration reform, these latest Supreme Court decisions have really affected the Latino community. And what we learned during the Trump years is that Latinos really, immigration was always like 4 or 5. It's always in the top 5, but it was not at the top. It's changed. The Trump years really pointed out to the Latino community how important immigration reform was, because it was a reflection on who we are and whether or not we're accepted in the country. And particularly the Dreamers still capture our imaginations, but also our TPS brothers and sisters. And that's particularly relevant here in Maryland, where we are such a multicultural community. The third thing that happened was Uvalde. Uvalde really made violent crime rise up as an issue for our community. And now you're seeing Latinos wanting, like 70% of Americans, to see universal background checks and investments to curb crime and gun violence. Also in, paying attention to violence in schools. And lastly, abortion has become much more salient. More than 70% of Latino voters believes it should remain legal, whatever their personal position is on it. So I wanted to just highlight 2 questions that were asked within these different surveys, excuse me. So the surveys that I looked at were Unidos US and Mi Familia Vota's poll that came out in September as well. The second one is Pew Hispanic Research. And the third survey came from X Labs, which is a Latino research it's kind of a nonprofit, it's a C4. So what did they have in mind when you said inflation and the rising cost of living are important issues? We're talking food and basic living expenses, we're talking gas prices, we're talking doctor's visits. Remember what I said about insurance rates, school supplies, clothes for kids, that whole supply chain problem we saw earlier in the year is still having impact. And those prices went up exponentially. The other issue that was not mentioned before so much was how running their small businesses has become much more expensive. And remember, we are a highly, highly entrepreneurial community. Oh, when asked about guns and crime, I think it's really important to see what they say. Guns, number one, 72% said guns are too easy to access. Elected officials need to find ways to stop shootings at school. We need community safety and mental health programs. Mental health programs comes up again and again and again. These two, well, domestic violence is not taken seriously by law enforcement. This is something, this is one of the first times I've seen this statistic. The next is crime has gone up in my neighborhood or community, and we've seen that, I think, across the country. Lastly, and this is something that I think is really important for campaigns to bear in mind, is no matter, it's, you know, how do you get your information? What we know from the Nielsen report is that about 69% of the Latino community gets their information through YouTube. So we have a lot of problems with misinformation and disinformation. But for our purposes today, it's really, let's look at language. You know, about 16% get almost all of their news in Spanish. People like my husband, somewhat often more in Spanish than in English, another 16%. Again, my husband, occasionally more English, some Spanish, 34%, rarely or never in Spanish, 34%. So I just wanted to set that up as a backdrop, I'm sorry, for our discussion that we're about to engage in right now. And with that, I will pass it over to our first speaker, Dr. Perla Guerrero, who's going to give us a brief history in 5 to 7 minutes of regional migration to the area, and some of the trends and Latinidades, right? It is Hispanic Heritage Month after all.
Gabriela,
Take it away.
Gabriela, before we go into that, I wanted to remind the audience, so please start putting those questions so that when we have a Q&A, we'll be ready for all of you.
Thank you everyone for being here. So yes, I'm gonna offer just some general, not trends, but issues that I have defined the Latinx communities. So I think the last point is a really important one, right? In terms of where do Latino voters get their information? And this is also something that comes down to generation, right? All my information I get in English, right? I was listening to NPR, and actually the NPR just aired a story today about how a lot of different places are targeting Latinx Spanish voters with misinformation. In the case that NPR covered, it was about abortion, right? I think about my parents, you know, my family immigrated when I was really young. My parents still are majority Spanish speakers. And at some point they watched something like Univision to get their news, right? Network news, they stopped watching Univision and now they watch YouTube, right? And I am in a place where I'm trying to kind of edit their, you know, their playlist. But the reality is that they're really, I've tried to find for my parents a YouTube channel, a podcast, something in Spanish that can offer either national or local news and context, and it's really not out there. So I think that's a really important point, right? And it, you know, the issue of generation is really important, right? My experience as an immigrant in the United States actually is quite different than my parents' experience as an immigrant in the United States, because they came when they were in their early 40s. I came when I was 6 years old. So I have a lot of experience going through school, college, master's, and then my doctoral work, right? So I have a very different engagement. This then affects the way that I vote. It also affects the way that they vote or they don't, right? Like I have no qualms saying that I kind of bullied my dad into making sure he voted the last national election. I can do that for a national election. I'm less effective in getting him to vote for like a local election. Mm-hmm. And we're in DC, just for clarity's sake, we live in DC. So I think, you know, no political party can take for granted the specificity of a community. In our area in Maryland, you mentioned TPS and Dreamers. You know, nationally, immigration might not be a very important issue, but it's a very important issue here because we have a whole generations of people that have lived under TPS that allow the temporary protected status allows them a legal presence in the United States that they wouldn't have otherwise. But how does that affect the choices that they make in terms of, are they buying homes? Are they sending their kids to school? What kind of status do their children have? And so I think, when we're interested in really learning about a particular state or local community, there's nothing like actually getting to know the folks that are local here, right? I teach at the University of Maryland, College Park. I teach in US Latino studies. And I have students tell me their experiences in terms of the disengagement also that they feel, right? So for those who are eligible to vote, there's a general lack of interest in voting, even for the Democratic Party, right? They're just kind of like, they're doing the same thing that every other party has done. So, this is my pitch for all of you who are interested, right? If you're interested in getting and maintaining voters, there has to be a different kind of engagement. There has to be a different message and a real commitment, right? Of what it is that they're voting for. And the other big takeaway that I wanted to bring up into the conversation is that oftentimes Latinos, especially those who are immigrants, are assumed to, of course, you're going to be Democratic voters. That's kind of the assumption. Whereas, like, of course, you're going to vote for Democrats because, the Democratic Party supports the kinds of programs or ideas that immigrants come with. But I think we have two real blind spots. One, if we look to a place like Florida, there are so many Latinx voters who are Republican, right? Like, if you are a member of the Democratic Party, cannot take Latinx voters for granted. It's way too easy, actually, to kind of convince them that, another party maybe has something to offer. The other danger, though, the other blind spot is, and we're seeing it with LA, the other coast, right? This week, the news broke that Nuri Martinez, who's LA City Council member, and 3 other members were speaking in very racist ways about Black Angelenos, in very racist ways about Indigenous Mexican immigrants or Indigenous Mexican Americans. And so the other thing that we cannot afford is to believe that because we are people of color or because we are immigrants, that we do not reproduce the very kinds of inequalities and racisms that have existed before. And, this links back to my earlier point of, like, how do you get more Democratic voters, especially if they're younger voters? I think a lot of younger voters are very aware and interested in social justice, but if the only thing you're saying is, like, come vote Democratic because we really get what, we really get you, they're gonna call you out. They're gonna say, actually, you really don't get us because you're just reproducing the very kind of dynamics that have existed elsewhere, right?
Right.
And then the last big point that I wanted to make is, and now I've lost my votes. Now I've lost my notes. Latinos don't just care about immigration. You have to actually work to win their vote, and this is also counterintuitive, but some immigrants who came undocumented and were able to legalize through the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, or amnesty as we call it, they then become anti-immigrant. Then they're like, no, we need to close the door, right? So again, there's a particular kind of messaging and education that has to happen in lots of ways. That is both about outreach to new voters, but that is also about, what is the Democratic Party actually, what does it stand for, right? And again, in the case of LA, folks were caught, but it's not that this conversation doesn't happen in other places. It's not that these ideas are so radical. It's actually the way you hear people talking. It's very quotidian, right? It's very everyday. This is the conversations that that they've had before, and that also is in some way about like diluting, this is my timer, about diluting like Black political power in LA, right? Oh, that was my other big, in the last kind of minute or so, my other big point is like, we should be doing work to build coalitions. And that isn't about not saying the racist things, and getting caught. It's about really kind of understanding that we could build something different. And the way that we do that is by actually like valuing other human beings who are Black and Indigenous and Asian American, and really building those coalitions, as opposed to simply relying on this idea that we're becoming a majority, like we being Latinos, that we're becoming a majority, and thus we need to have X amount of political power. Because if the only thing we're doing is saying like the numbers in representation need to match the numbers in population, but we don't change anything else about our approach, about racism, about white supremacy, about ableism, then we're just reproducing a system where some of us are going to hold those positions of power, but the rest is going to remain the same. And there's still going to be a disconnect between a lot of people who, especially I think are young people, who are not going to vote for anybody. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guerrero. That is a lot to think about, and I think it blends well with the data I just showed. I think you really raised up in a very powerful way how that actually intersects in reality in people's families and people's lives. I'm glad you didn't lose your vote, by the way. You said that earlier instead of your notes. So our next speaker is Mariana Cordier. And my question for her is, tell us a little bit about Latinos by the number, the growth of the community from your perspective in your legal field, right? But also more importantly, you were very active in the redistricting process. Tell us a little bit about that and how that went.
So that was a very interesting experience. I was lucky enough to be honored to be appointed or elected to chair the Montgomery County Redistricting Commission that redrew the lines for the county council because of the results of the census and the growth in the county. We added 2 seats or 2 districts. And so we went from 5 to 7, and we kept the 4 at large. And so it became challenging because unfortunately Maryland has a little bit of a reputation for gerrymandering. And so we wanted to make sure that, or I wanted to make sure, and the commissioners that were on there agreed with me. And I think that's why in the end we were successful in delivering a map to the county council, and understanding what is redistricting, what does it involve, what is the law regarding redistricting. There is quite a bit of Supreme Court precedence that governs how that occurs and what it looks like. But the biggest challenge was getting the census information because of litigation. Because the Trump administration wanted to include questions that had not been before in a census, that delayed the actual processing of the information. So when we should have gotten the information probably, early August, if not July, we actually got it on, I believe it was like around September 13th. Which is late considering that we had to process that and deliver maps by November to the county council. And so the commission was made up of independents, which I was one, Democrats and Republicans. And so because we had a little bit of a delay, we took the opportunity to really, have speakers come and present to the commission the numbers. And what was really interesting, and I think it goes along with the national conversation that the other speakers are mentioning, is that the growth of the Hispanic population was significant, and the lack of growth in non-Hispanic white population reduced. It was smaller. And so, and over the course of looking at the information of where the growth in the county took place, everybody assumed that it would be exploding in the lower part of the county, Silver Spring, Tacoma Park. And although they did grow, the largest population was in Germantown. And Germantown, for voting purposes, is one of the lowest turnouts in the county. And interestingly enough, Up County was pressuring us to put more districts in Up County because they felt they needed more representation, because a lot of the at-large seats end up being from Silver Spring and Tacoma Park. But they could have their seats plus an at-large if Germantown voted. And so it is the sleeping giant, because when I pointed this out to all the communities, because it's not just Hispanic, you know, the second largest community that was growing was the Indian population. I mean, we have the breakdowns, if you will permit me to shout out the numbers, are 12.9% is the top, one of the top growths is El Salvadorians. Then it's people from India, 7.9%. Then China, 6.7%. And then we have Guatemala by 5.7 and Peru 3.9. So it was interesting to see. We're not the only ones that are growing, but in 2000, 59.5% of the county was racially and ethnically white. But by 2019, it was only 41.8%. So Montgomery County is a very diverse and has changed quite a bit. And the Hispanic population grew from 14.8% to 17.9%. So the issue really became very clear that there is a belief that the Latino community in Montgomery County is in Wheaton. And it's not just in Wheaton. Yes, Wheaton is significantly Hispanic, but Germantown has a big population too. But we struggle, as Dr. Guerrero was saying, to activate those immigrants and Hispanics in Germantown to turn out to vote. And one of the experiences that I had this past election when I was knocking on doors and doing the grassroots outreach was that many of them were saying, you only knock on my door when you want something. You're never there otherwise. And so, you know, and being able to speak to them, because I'm originally from Argentina, I'm born in Argentina. And so I could talk to them with my Argentina accent to say, well, tell me why you think we only knock on the door. You know, to be honest with you, this is my first time out knocking. Why are you saying that? And the response that I got was, we are a commodity that is convenient during elections, and we are inconvenient when it's not an election period. And we want to be engaged when it's a non-election year. And so that to me made sense. I mean, the outreach of the Democratic Party has to catch up to the outreach that is going on by the Republican Party. They are reaching out and trying to garner the Latino vote. And the Latino vote, you know, the Latino community is a very diverse community. We have European Latinos like myself with a French background. We have, you know, the native population infused with the Spanish and so forth, and African Latinos. And so we have in Argentina, we have a large community of Koreans. In Nicaragua, they have a large community of Chinese, Latinos. We have literally, you know, just about every mix you can possibly imagine. So we cannot be approached or painted with broad strokes. And so the cultural competence of knowing who you're approaching, how to talk to them, what is important. A lot of Latinos are small business owners. So the economy is super important to them. And there's a lot of other issues that are super important to us that fall in the middle, that fall, you know, being attractive to the Democrat or the Republican Party. So it's super important for the party to reach out and build that grassroots outreach, build those coalitions on off years so that you can really wake up that sleeping giant, get those votes there, and make sure that Montgomery County continues on the right path is what I would say. And ultimately, hopefully that would transcend nationwide.
Those are excellent comments, and thank you particularly for the backstory on the redistricting. That's very interesting. Wow, thank you so much for doing all of that too. So we're going to go to our next speaker, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, and that is Teresa Werman and Saavedra Woorman, excuse me. So you represent the next generation of voters, millennials and Gen Z. So tell us a little bit about how do we help, how can we support you in getting them engaged in the political process? Because it is, I think, next to the baby boomers, the next largest block of voters. And that's significant for all of us as we think about the future. And you know, you're the future, right? Tell us a little bit about your perspective. And as an elected official now, congratulations.
Thank you. Well, thank you guys for having me here. Obviously, I'm a longtime admirer of the vital work that the Women's Democratic Club and the Latino Democratic Club do. And it's often thankless work. So thank you so much for your dedication in putting this panel together today. So I'm here to talk about a few things. One, I want to talk about my experience as running a campaign in Montgomery County, countywide campaign in Montgomery County. I want to talk about running my very small campaign in my own district. And want to talk about working together to reach the next generation of voters. And I'm going to start with how hard it was for me to run for office. You know, I am an immigrant, come from a mixed status family. And when I first started toying around with the idea of running for the Central Committee, and for those of you that don't know, the Central Committee is basically the governing body of the local Democratic Party. So we're all the way at the bottom of your ballot, right above the Board of Education. And those Board of Education races are super important this year. If you want any help with that, I could talk to you about that offline. But anyways, so yeah, so it was very hard for me to do it. You know, at the time I was working for a politician whose dad was the Montgomery County executive in the 80s, I believe. So, and I, you know, my family was a completely different type of family. So just, you know, seeing those two different paths to politics was really interesting. And as supportive as my family was, you know, there's no making up for your dad was the county executive at one point. So that's who I kind of kept comparing myself to, right? And also running my own campaign was different in that I'd run other campaigns before, but this time I had to pitch myself. And the district that I was running in is a largely white older district. So I had to, you know, I had to put up with a few questions, the inevitable questions of like, where are you really from? And, you know, do you really have the qualifications to be doing this, you know, doing this job, that kind of stuff. And what I found is that most people are just curious, you know, they don't mean anything nefarious when they're asking questions like that, but it does kind of, you know, it hurts when you get questions, odd questions like that. And I will say that although nobody, when I was door knocking for myself in my district, none of the doors that I went to were Spanish speakers, but I did have my campaign literature printed in Spanish too, in case that ever came up. So anyway, so now I'll turn to running Mark's campaign. So obviously running a countrywide campaign is such a diverse place as Montgomery County. It's not easy, fast, or cheap. And one of the things that we really pride ourselves in Montgomery County is the different languages that we speak. So that's why I mentioned about translating the campaign literature. One of the things that we have to think about when we're campaigning is something as basic as making sure that the languages that most people speak that you're trying to reach are the materials that you have are actually translated into those languages. So this time around, when I was running Mark's campaign, I got a unique insight into doing outreach into the Latino community, because My parents happened to be first-time voters this time around. They became naturalized at the end of last year. So they were able to vote this time around. So as soon as they did their oath ceremony and everything, they went to get their applications to apply to register to vote. And sorry, I lost my spot. And this is one of the first roadblocks that we encounter when doing any type of Latino outreach, is just getting them to register to vote when they're eligible. And for my parents, I won't be shy about it. It took a little bit of convincing to get them to register for the Democratic Party, because they come from countries that have more than more than two viable political parties. And they come from countries that have a understandable distrust in government. So, they did not want to be labeled a Democrat. They did not want to be labeled a Republican. They just wanted to be unaffiliated. But then we come across to that problem that we all know, but when you get your unaffiliated ballot, you can only vote for a few offices if it's during the primary. So, it didn't take much convincing, because I told them that I needed them to vote for my boss, but they registered to vote as Democrats. But that's one of the things that other panelists were bringing up. It's not automatic, and it's not first nature for Latinos to automatically just pick a party. Sorry. And then the other thing that I was going to say is that things get even trickier when you bring the dynamics that the panelists brought in. Latinos don't necessarily register for the Democrats. A lot of the policies that they're in favor for are actually more Republican-leaning policies. Like, when I was talking to my dad about this one, he's a small business owner. He said, well, the first thing that if you're asking me as a Latino, what's the first thing that I care about? I care about the upcoming recession. I'm a small business owner. I want to make sure the houses are still being built so that I can have a job. He's in construction. And one of the things that, in specific political campaigns, it's very hard to do because it's really expensive to do so, is doing the specific outreach to different parts of the community. So I look at the way that Montgomery County did their, I don't know if you guys remember the Abuelina character that we had for the pandemic to promote vaccination. So during the beginning of the pandemic, the county noticed that Latino communities in the county were being disproportionately affected by COVID. So the county quickly worked with consultants to come up with a marketing campaign to bring attention to the different protocols at the time and eventually for vaccination. So they came up with this Abuelina character, which was very culturally competent and was very good at advocating for people to have different COVID safety protocols. That was a non-political campaign, but I really truly believe that if campaigns had enough money and enough manpower to be able to turn these culturally appropriate characters and move them into the political sphere, we could really actually do a lot of, have a bigger impact. Somebody else mentioned that, up in the panel earlier, mentioned that Latinos tend to listen to our families. Yeah, we do, but we also tend to listen a lot to our grandmas. So, the Abuelina character was just very, very, very successful in Montgomery County. And now I'll bring it up into a little bit of the national trends before I bring it back to the young folks. I'll say the reality is that not just in our area, but across the whole country, the Republicans are doing a lot more investing in getting that Latino vote. They are, I don't know if you guys have seen, but around the, especially Montgomery County, I have seen a lot of outreach from the Republicans towards Latinos. I saw them show up at the El Salvador festival that we had a couple of weeks back. And that's the kind of involvement that I've never seen before from a Republican campaign in Maryland. So that really struck me. And the other thing that I did want to bring up is like where people get their information. And, you guys mentioned the misinformation that is happening in YouTube, but the same misinformation that we see happen on Facebook and on Twitter is happening, but in Spanish. But in Spanish, it doesn't get checked. So we might see the banner that's in English. We might see the banner that says, this is COVID information, make sure that you're checking your sources. A lot of times that doesn't get picked up in the Spanish version of the same type of post. So, that's not something politically that we can do, but that is something that we need to be aware of when we're speaking to those communities. All right, and then moving on to the young kids. So last night at the Central Committee, we voted to elect our new student members of the Central Committee. And hearing from them, I was just incredibly impressed by these kids, not just because, of all of the extracurricular stuff that they've done to further their communities, but just how aware they are of the issues that are going on in the world. They could see, because of social media, they can see a problem happening across the world and somehow translate that into their local communities. They know that change is possible, and we just have to reach them where they are, which is their social media. During the primary campaign, I had a set of college and high school interns. And the number one thing, that campaigns do when we're starting to train people is like, all right, we're gonna get you comfortable on the phones. The kids could not have been more upset at being told they had to be on the phones, and that became their least favorite activity to do, because they felt like reaching people through text was easier. And we tried it out, and we could be calling the same people on their, calling them on their phone or texting them, and texting just brought a lot more responses back, just like they thought it was gonna happen. So it's a matter of using their resourcefulness and then getting our message to them and getting them to see how they can make a bigger impact in our community. So I've talked a lot, but I'll leave it there. I'm sure you guys will have questions.
Wow, you did, and you did have a lot to say, and excellent. I love it. You pulled together a lot of the issues that the other speakers raised, and gave us kind of a different way of looking at it. I love the texting part with regards to versus phone banking. In a lot of the campaign civic engagement that I've done, we find that they text do work well, and there's all kinds of new software and things, but like you said, it's expensive. It's expensive to begin to reach out, etc. So let's open it up to the group. I see some questions. I saw one question specifically about middle-class voters and political attitudes and policy interests. How have you done any work in that space? Perla, you mentioned a little bit about it in your research, but both you, Mariana, and Teresa also mentioned it in different ways. How would you frame that? How would you frame those middle-class Latino and business owner interests? I mentioned in the PowerPoint that, really the state of the economy has gone way up. How could Democrats talk to Latinos about that and reach them? Any thoughts?
Well, the Latino community, middle class community that is small business owners, I've represented a number of them. I was a small business owner with a law firm. The reality is that they're looking at their tax consequences. They're looking at available funding through banks and relationships, and they're looking at the impact it's going to have if they have any staff or employees, and the access to work, and a lot of the industry that the Latino community was impacted, for instance, in the pandemic. It was impacted by the economy. If the economy tanks, construction is a huge component, and they're not your typical construction workers like people might think. I mean, they're the people that have a cement company and are providing cement to the construction sites. They're the carpenters. They have multiple skills that, they're not what some people may feel like are day laborers. And so, that lack of understanding that you're talking to someone who may not speak English, but is a very savvy business owner, and you're talking to them as if they are not fully educated enough to be aware, you're going to lose them as potential voters. And the Republican Party unfortunately speaks their language in that sense, and also they are very conservative with family attitudes. A lot of the Latino men, for instance, tend to be more Republican affiliated when you bring up the issue of reproduction and abortion rights. And so that's a delicate conversation to have with them, to understand women's rights in comparison to the abortion issue, which is very, very much up front in the politics of today.
And I will add on to that, that's one of my biggest pet peeves when I join a campaign, and the campaign is like, I want you to put together a Latino for whatever group, you're going to focus on Latino issues. And I'm like, the Latino, there are some issues like immigration, but the same issues that affect a small business owner, as a white small business owner, are going to be affecting the Latino business owner. I just, there is some Latino issues, but I guarantee you that if you ask most people, and I did during the campaign, their issues are just the same issues that all of us in this room have.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is that in what Mariana brought up about like abortion rights, the kind of one of the things we haven't talked about is religion, right? Like a lot of Latinos, immigrants or not, are either Catholic, but also increasingly evangelical, right? And there's actually a growing Muslim Latinx community, right? So like religious beliefs also become a really important prism that is reflected in maybe not voting, but what they think is important, right? And again, I think it's just kind of a pitch for Latinos are not a homogenous group, and you cannot count on Latinos to vote one way because it's about immigration or whatever. Like, that's just not the reality. I don't think it actually has ever been the reality, but it's just the way Latinos are talked about, which goes back to this idea of like Latinos as a sleeping giant, right? And like every election cycle, it's like, oh, we're going to get them to wake up. It's like, we're here. You're just not saying anything that's really of interest to us, whatever that is. To me as a college professor, to your dad as a small business owner, to whomever, to my dad as a retiree, like you're just not saying anything that's of real interest. So I think, going forward, just kind of being very aware of that specificity.
Sorry, it would help if I turned my mic on. That, I think what you all said, like that really resonates with me and what I've seen in all the different research that I have pulled together. So there's been a couple of questions around disinformation and targeting the Latino population. I saw a data point this morning that really struck me. Basically, what is it, the FCC, for communications, when they regulate English language very, very fairly strictly, but social media still kind of is a beast, right? Spanish language does not get the same kind of regulatory oversight, and what we see is that disinformation stays on Spanish language sites, and I think Teresa, I think you raised that, for much longer. We see upwards of, I think what I read this morning was 69% of the disinformation stays in the Spanish language sites, whereas only 20-something of that information, which is bad enough, stays on English language sites. So how do we fight this? How do we fight the amount of bilingual disinformation targeting the Latinx communities? It goes on to say, nobody notices English language disinformation and nobody thinks of looking for the Spanish language information. Any thoughts on that?
I think one of the biggest struggles we have is that there's not enough investment in legitimate, newsworthy programs, whether it's a podcast or YouTube or even on TV. There are the standard Univision, and there's a couple, but more and more people are looking at social media, and they're not looking at the main, cable stations and such. So, radio, for instance, in the Latino community is huge, because in the mornings they've got their radios on when they're going to work, and when they're at lunch, or they may have their, ears plugged in while they're working, and all kinds of stuff. So they're listening a lot, and, they gravitate towards certain shows that they feel an affinity to, whether, they're playing more Mexican music or Central American music or South American music. And so, and it opens the door also for disinformation to be coming from abroad. It's not just, local information, and whether they care to listen to it or not. And so I think that there has to be some investment in not only the forms of communication, but the personalities to deliver it, because the Latino community, in my perspective, from what I've seen from my years of talking to clients and stuff like that, they also have personalities that they trust. And so they'll follow what that personality opinion is, or what they're saying, or if they don't trust them, they want to at least hear what their opinion is. And it's kind of like looking for your abuelitas in the media community that can deliver the information that is trustworthy.
And I'll chime in again on this. I will say that I do think Montgomery County is trying to do a little bit better as much as they can. I remember when we were doing the vote recount for this past primary, my MC Media had a Spanish-speaking reporter speaking to me and asking me questions in Spanish. And, that just something I've never seen before. I've never noticed before, but it is starting to happen in Montgomery County.
The only thing I'll add is that I think there is an element of, if you're not speaking English, we don't really care, right? Which is dismissing. I think it goes back to the issue that I think maybe Mariana said about, like the assumption, the stereotype about Latinos is that we're uneducated immigrants, and what could we possibly know about politics? And I think Teresa said, like we bring our political knowledge with us, for better or for worse, right? Especially those of us who are immigrants, about like what politics is in Mexico, in El Salvador, in Honduras, and Guatemala, for better or for worse. But it doesn't mean that we're uninformed. It just means we actually understand quite well the way political misinformation is used even within like official parties, right? Within official political parties. But I think the other element is that like the assumption is that for Spanish speakers or other speakers that we can't possibly like care or want to know, when in reality, it's often just a barrier, right? Like for someone like my dad, who worked as a laborer, it's not that he doesn't speak English, it's that he doesn't speak English well enough to really be able to follow certain conversations, right? And so that to reach him, it does have to be in Spanish, right? But the assumption is, oh, you're a Spanish speaker, so like whatever, you must not really care, you must not know, or you must not want to know. And I think that's the real kind of mistake, is dismissing a whole group of people simply because they're not fully bilingual.
I want to add to that, piggyback to that, or do what I tell you. This is how you should vote. And that will really turn off the Latino voters.
Sorry, I'm getting stuck with my buttons here. I'm trying to be quiet, and because I comment a lot, I grunt.
Gabriela, sorry to jump in. Can I just interrupt for a second? I wanted to acknowledge we have David Naiman with us, who is one of the Democratic members of our County Board of Elections, which raises a number of points. One is that David helped protect the budget, the Board of Elections, for foreign language materials and radio and television in the last cycle. And David, as a reminder, why if we don't get a Democratic governor, we're going to wind up with another minority on the Board of Elections because the governor's party runs every single Board of Elections in every county. So thank you, David, for joining us. And I also see Karen Brito is here, who's a former chair of the Central Committee, and Aaron Kaufman, who is the who's on the D18 state delegate team. So thank you all. I hope I didn't miss anyone. Sorry to jump in.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being with us. So another question just came in. Have any of you seen any research of Latinos receiving information from international media outlets, mostly based in Central and South America? We have our local radio programs, but you know, do we know about research done on that and what they're saying about our elections over on this side of the border?
I think people need to understand that those of us who have family abroad, you know, when the Hurricane Ian hit, I got calls, are you guys going to be okay? You know, so, and, you know, depending on your family's interest in politics or not, it's the same as I would say here. They will call, they will talk about politics, they will complain about our politicians because they're getting the news as well. And so, you know, the extended family is very important in the Latino culture and is a factor that plays in. So most of my clients, when they're talking to me, they're talking about watching soccer of their, you know, country teams, and we all know Argentina's #1, right? But they're watching the local games, they're watching the national games, they're watching the cups from the region, you know, for the South American Cup, the Central American, North American, and along the way, that's how they're getting their information, whether it's news or entertainment. And so there are a lot of infusion from a lot of directions, and that's where it's so easy to promulgate the disinformation and or the impact on your belief as to who you should support or not. And so, you know, I can't tell you how many people actually think that Trump is great, you know, and and then the other people who think he's, you know, awful. And so it has a factor in playing in to what, you know, people, how they develop their opinions or develop their belief of what is the actual news.
You know, I mean,
go ahead.
yes, I mean, listening here and reading the questions, and I need to ask this because I've been asked many times, how do we call ourselves? Latinx, Hispanic, Latine, Latino, Latina? Tell me, help the audience here and tell me too.
Well, a million years ago, when when I was part of the Maryland Hispanic Bar, we were trying to figure out, should we be the Maryland Latino Bar or it became a question of many Hispanics or Latinos objecting to any reference to Spain and the colonization of all of the Western Hemisphere. And so, you know, for when I was part of the Inter-American Bar Association, in Spanish, we are La Federación Interamericana de Abogados. It was the Inter-American. For us, it was, we are American. This is the American hemisphere and not the Spanish hemisphere, if you will. So there's a lot of politics, but they've changed over time. And the younger population may not see it so much as whether it's Spanish or non-Spanish, but I'm talking about Spain Spanish, not like the language. But it's an interesting conversation because different people use different appellations.
I will say about me personally, when I was younger, and I grew up in Germantown. My parents are still in Germantown, so there's two of the new voters in Germantown that you guys had to accommodate. So I grew up in Germantown, so I used to say Hispanic, and once I started becoming more aware of political, you know, and becoming more in the political world, I switched over to Latina. You know, I maybe once I'm in this world longer, I'll switch over to Latinx. I think, you know, That's just me.
I think so yes, as Mariana said, the brief rundown is Hispanic includes Spain based on language, but excludes countries like Brazil. Whereas Latina, Latino, Latinx includes Brazil, like includes non-Spanish speaking countries in this hemisphere. And increasingly there is a push, by some people, including Haitians themselves, to include Haiti as Latin American, right? I mean, the Haitian Revolution actually is a watershed moment in this hemisphere. It led to many of the revolutions of which we, are beneficiaries. So, that's the big difference, technically. But as Teresa pointed out, right, there is usually a move where like Hispanic is often what we saw in forms and what often still appears in forms, versus Latina, Latino, that does have a little bit more of like a political connotation that can also be broken down into other groups. Like in the West Coast, to be Chicana, Chicano, right, is even that you're more kind of politically aware, you have a particular kind of political inclination. In New York, if you're identified as New Yorican specifically, that also has a particular kind of like identification, right? And then the big thing is Latinx with an X or Latine with an E is to be gender inclusive, right? It's to be aware that some folks in our community and the world are non-binary. And so that this is a gender inclusive term, right? And to me, it's really funny when people react in a negative way towards Latinx. It's like, oh, this is a made up word. It's like, oh, but Zoom is just like in the way you use it now, is a perfectly great word. Or, other kind of language that we use, like woke, like that's lit, like that's fire, that, enters our vocabulary. Those words we're fine with, right? But like all of a sudden Latinx, or to use an X, seems so like outrageous. But it is gender inclusive, and in a lot of spaces in Latin America, for Spanish speakers, they're using E, right? So instead of in an attempt to really make the Spanish language more gender inclusive, because what I was taught is like, oh, the O is a universal. It's like, oh, que conveniente. Everything male is universal and everything female is not universal. So the solution is the E. So that's just a very kind of quick rundown on, like all the messiness of language.
So one last question that just came in, and I think it's really important, is what suggestions do you have for making it easier for Latino, Latinx, Latina, Latine, Hispanic voters in Montgomery County? Make it easier for them to show up at the polls or vote by mail, vote early. They have options.
I mean, there's a lot out there that's been made available to make voting easier across the board, not just for Latinos. And Montgomery County is really good at doing it in Spanish, the Spanish ballots and stuff. I think this isn't about making voting easier. This is about the hard work of doing the grassroots work of approaching a diverse community and inspiring them to participate. I mean, in Argentina, you're required to vote. You have to go and get a little stamp on your identity documents to prove you voted. Different countries have different rules and policies, and like the panelists said earlier, everybody has a different experience from their country and what it was to vote, or what impact it would have. Because there was also in our countries a lot of corruption when it comes to voting and free elections and such. So the bottom line is that it's not the easy, cheap solution. This is the actual long-term commitment to engage an entire community and population, to engage them in an intelligent conversation without, disparaging, and thinking that they're uneducated and they don't understand, and we have to lead them down the road to participation. No, this is about having a conversation about why we should appeal to you. Why is it important to vote? Why is your voice a crucial component? Because of your schools, because of your taxes, because of your, your community. And so if you don't have your voice heard, then you will be ignored.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'll
Do
get
you
back
want to hop in? Come on.
just really quick. What I was gonna say is that yes, that's part of it, but part of it also is that we need to make it easier for people to understand, the immigrants that are voting right now just went through a naturalization test where they were taught about civics in it. I
Mhm.
feel that if nonpartisan organizations are able to hone in on that civic duty part of it and make that more prominent, this is part of what you get to do. There's so many other people that don't have that chance. I think that, not for a particular campaign to do, but more in non-political entity.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I'm going to hand it back over to Gloria to kind of wrap it up. I want to thank you all. You've been amazing. It's been a total pleasure for me to have the honor of being allowed to moderate you. This is just too many questions. There's still a bunch more, but I don't think we're going to be able to squeeze them all in. Gloria, wrap it up.
Could we just give it a virtual round of applause to this wonderful panel? How amazing. And I hope the audience here get a little to know about us, that we're not monolithic, that we're thinking in very different ways, that we are engaged, but you have to be engaged more, and you have to be connecting with us too. So that is the critical part. And I commend you for giving this message to our audience here. And we salute everyone this evening that took their time to listen to this, to understand our community. We have fun too. We have family. We like to eat. I'm pretty sure, and we eat more than Mexican food, great Mexican food, but we have others. Explore that too. We missed that point to mention because we wanted to emphasize the civic engagement aspect. And as we engage our schools and we engage our community, we have to invest. So ladies and gentlemen, and X and Y and Zs, I want to tell you, the only way that you can get the vote is you have to go to those committees. You have to invest time and resources. And once you do that, and then you get your vote, don't forget about us. Don't forget and put it us in the closet again. And then when you get your team, your leadership team that is going to lead your organization, the government, don't forget about us either. We want to be at that leadership level. We want to have a seat at the table. And we look for those tables too and bring our own seat. But sometimes you have to appoint us. So keep that in mind. And that is what we wanted to ask you to do for us. This was an amazing evening. Muchísimas gracias, Diana. I hope that you're feeling like, oh my God, got a crazy woman here that I'm paying off in a better way. And we'll have more events coming up. The Latino Clubs have an event on the 23rd, on Sunday, October 23rd, and it's the Club of Colors fall social event at the home of Catherine and Honor Ike-Leggett Homes. Google it, and we are sending you that invitation on October 23rd. Diana?
Thank you, Gloria, and thank you to all our panelists. That was a terrific presentation. And Gabriela, I now that I know how much you know, while we were sitting at the WDC table at the gala, I wish I had sat down next to you the whole time and made you download to me. It was really, that's just so impressive, all of you on the panel.
Anytime.
I love the breadth, Gloria, that you pulled together for this. And Luisa, I want to say thank you also for coordinating with Gloria and letting our two clubs work together. I look forward to working a lot more with you. And I invite everyone on the 18th. I will not be there because I'll be in Italy, but I invite everyone on the 18th. WDC is hosting a happy hour with a purpose. And it's free, it's open to everyone. We have suddenly had to change the location because of a family issue with the host, but we will have a location soon. It's at Women's Democratic Club website, and I urge you to just sign up, join us. And the only reason to sign up is so we can make sure we have enough food and drinks to make everyone feel welcome and to continue conversations like this. It's not just a happy hour, it is truly a happy hour with a purpose. So I invite you all to that. And I think, Gloria, that's a wrap. Is that right?
Yes, and we finished
Great.
on time.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening, and don't forget to watch the gubernatorial debate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
night.
Thank you, everyone.